This is pretty cool. For pre-ordering the game, they threw in this replica of the Ring of Power, and it even has the Elvish script on it. This is rather cool. Let's see if we could put it on here. No! No! I'm just gonna take this, set it right here, because as evil as this ring is, it must be kept hidden. Because that's all that they do in these games and movies and stories. They never destroy it, they keep it. Because it's just that powerful. Logic. Hey everyone, David here with my super belated but really informative and rather important review of Middle-earth: Shadow of War. The sequel to what a lot of people consider the surprise hit of 2014, Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. This tells the story of Talion and Celebrimbor coming back to put an end to Sauron's reign over Middle-earth by crafting a brand new ring so that they can take the fight to him. Only things kind of go a little bit unexpectedly, not exactly the way that they intended, and from that point on, the fight for Middle-earth and the war raging for all that is good versus evil has begun. And I'm hoping that that synopsis was good enough for you, because if you buy the game don't tell you shit. You rotate it to the back, you just got a bunch of pictures right there. Come on guys. This is bad. Alright, let's say that there's a middle-aged mother trying to buy a game for their kid. They go into the store, they pick this up, oh, it looks rather interesting, they turn it around. I have no idea what the fuck this is. But hopefully after my introduction there, you know what exactly the game is all about. But how good or bad is exactly the game? That's what the review is for. And I was really excited for Shadow of War, because after playing Shadow of Mordor, I knew that there was something special here, something rather unique, because it was a good while that we had a good Lord of the Rings games, even though I'm not saying that there weren't any before, but there was something brand new about Shadow of Mordor that was bringing to the table, that with its gameplay, with the Nemesis system, as well as the story with an original character that still organically ties his own story over to what happens within the Lord of the Rings mythology, that felt genuine, that felt like it could actually exist as part of this universe. And because of that story melding with the gameplay to form a rather addictive experience that, again, not many people realized was going to happen with a Middle-earth game, it was just unfathomable. And to think that this was a Game of the Year contender, obviously it created not only critical but also commercial success. It sold a lot of copies, so it was a little imminent that there was going to be a sequel. However, I have a theory. I am confident that Monolith Productions, the developer behind this game, was intending on making a different game, maybe even a brand new IP, before tackling the Shadow of Mordor sequel. They had intentions to do it. In fact, they were probably brimming with ideas of where they can take things and kind of elevate them. But then WB came knocking at the door and said, hey, that game you wanted to do? Yeah. Go ahead and put it to the side, because we need you to make the sequel now. Sinking about 4 or 5 hours into the game, that's the feeling that it started to kind of extrapolate from Shadow of War, that it felt more like a business move on WB's part rather than Monolith genuinely making an artistic decision to be like, you know what, we have more story to tell, we have further gameplay mechanics that we want to introduce and we're excited to bring to you guys. Even though there's still talent there, like Warner Brothers really lucked out, WB Interactive, they really lucked out with a production company like Monolith, because they didn't feel like half-assing anything, and they put as much effort and dedication into this gameplay and into the story as they could possibly push, considering the possible struggles that they had to kind of overcome, because this game did have its fair share of hurdles going into its production, from the controversy it generated with its microtransactions to even a couple of delays when it was originally going to come out in August and now it got pushed to October. There were so many things that they kind of needed to tackle, and considering that the situation happening with the microtransactions, I feel like maybe there was some kind of push-pull struggle between these two entities, that it was a little apparent during the first half or so of this game, because the game is separated into 4 acts, and Act 1 I felt was just a little bit on the slow side, because for one, the story is not necessarily as compelling as the first game. I thought that the story for the first game was a much more endearing. It made me connect with Talon a little bit more, especially because of the tragedy that he undergoes at the very beginning, losing his family, losing his leadership, losing the very ground that he stood on, and being almost like an outcast that is now literally tied over to this ghost, to this specter that is his only way out. In Shadow of War, the game starts off with some circumstances and events that aren't as compelling, and the reason being is that I feel like some of the shit that happens was kind of sort of Talion and Celebrimbor's faults. Like, it was kind of their own doing. I felt like maybe they could have approached things a little bit differently. I understood where they were coming from, but they kind of had it coming. You know, it's hard for me to say that they weren't having it coming because of what they kind of kickstarted at the very beginning of this game. If they hadn't done that, then maybe they could have found a different way to kind of go about their path throughout this game. But at the same time, I can't fault them too much because circumstances were dire. There's a very big power struggle, and there's an evil lurking in the horizon that they knew that they needed to vanquish, and they needed to go to some extreme measures. So even though I prefer the story for Shadow of Mordor, that's not to say that Shadow War's story is bad in any way. It still goes from point A to point B in a really great way. Granted, when it ties into the gameplay, it could feel a little bit fragmented, especially when you're dealing with some side quests that don't really feel like side quests, but they're kind of like side quests, except they're also part of the main story, and they tie into it, some involving an orc that goes over to your side, and then things kind of take twists and turns for the better or for the worse, and then you're dealing with essentially the Middle Earth's version of Mother Nature coming to life and helping you out in some ways, while at the same time learning more about how that whole thing works, and several other angles of Mordor that are trying to fight for the betterment of civilization. And Talion's role playing into all of that, you kind of get a feeling of what that's all about. It's just that it does feel a little, and I hate saying this because it's a video game, but video gamey. I felt like Shadow of Mordor was just a little bit more straightforward and a little better connected with its story rather than this one. I will, however, give humongous credit to the ending of this game, or at least the ending that I managed to experience up until, because it ends in a very Empire Strikes Back type of way, where I'm like, if you have the gonads to make a third game, I don't know how you're gonna do it, because shit goes down. Obviously, no spoilers here, but it leads to some events that I was like, okay, that I did not see coming, and I have to give you major credit for that. That's something that it definitely had a leg up over the story for Shadow of Mordor, is that it ends in a very unpredictable and very high stakes type of way that reminded me of some of those better sequels from its predecessor, from movies to games like Empire Strikes Back, and even the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I was also rather scared that the game was going to take itself a little bit too seriously, because during the part where it was being just a little bit slow, it was also being rather melodramatic, especially with stuff that has to do with Talion and Celebrimbor, where I'm like, guys, lighten up. You guys are being rather sticklers, especially Celebrimbor. For a while, I was starting to wonder, like, I really hope I'm not meant to like this guy, because he's being rather douchey. At least in the first game, we were kind of being introduced to the character, so as the game progressed, we were starting to learn why exactly he was so bitter, why he's very haunting and very stoic and very, like, straight to the point, nothing but business. Here, he continues that, and I think at this point, he could have learned a little bit to loosen up, to get things done in a better way, but he doesn't really do it. He doesn't feel like he went through a journey. He just feels kind of stagnant. There I go using that fucking word again. I hate it. Same thing with Talion. Sometimes he's just a little bit too serious, yelling at the top of his lungs. Like, I was like, oh, are you gonna go to the Kratos route? Until the game kind of becomes self-aware of that and starts introducing some secondary characters that are a little bit likable, some of them involving humans from the different cities, to even some orcs. I don't want to ruin the surprise, but there's some orcs that have some really funny dialogue and some really clever voice acting behind them that brought a really good feel of humor to really alleviate the really dead-on seriousness that was happening at the time. And that's something that is consistent with the first game, is that the voice acting is rather good. Even if I had some issues with the characters, Troy Baker playing Talion, I mean, Troy Baker, he plays fucking everything. And even though I did think that his British accent was kind of coming and going in certain parts, he still made me feel for Talion and still made me want to stick with the character, more so than Celebrimbor. And even then, the voice actor behind Celebrimbor, I don't remember the name, but he still is able to deliver some lines in a very haunting way, where it's like, I feel like he's that parasitic nightmare that just lurks in your head because he's supposed to be that for Talion, and I think it really drove the point across. But also, so many other supporting characters have really good voice acting behind them. But to be honest, I think that the biggest credit and the biggest props from voice acting has to go to almost every single actor that plays the orcs, because on top of having to play an orc, there's so many different roles and so many variations of the orcs that are likely to be played by the same actors. Like one actor could be probably playing like 5 different orcs, and they're very distinguishable. Like not once do I go, oh, that's the same voice as the one before. They all sound different, especially if there were a limited amount of actors to provide the voices for all of these dozens of orcs, some of which require them to like yell at the top of their lungs and screech and growl their voice and turn it into sound. Like my voice just hurt from imagining the voice actor in the booth trying to do this voiceover and probably killing himself for it. And I think those guys need to be superbly respected for the talent that they brought to this game. However, the visuals, not so much. Alright, stay with me, bear with me. I'm getting to a point here. Don't pitchforks down. The game still looks good. The way it's designed, the way it's able to replicate Middle-earth, while at the same time kind of having like a stylistic design to some of the way that these fortresses are built, or to some of these environments, including Nurnen. I think Nurnen is the biggest standout because it kind of resembles like an island, so it's a little bit different than what you would expect out of not only Middle-earth, but Mordor in general, where everything's supposed to be like dire with lava and rock and stuff like that. I like that they were able to vary from environment to where some feel like a desert, others feel like we're up in the Himalayas, like this game's version of the Himalayas. But Nurnen to me was the big standout, where everything was lush and green, and I'm like, okay, this looks good. But if you were to tell me that Shadow of War was running on the PlayStation 3, that would not necessarily be that unbelievable. The pre-rendered cutscenes that you get in between missions look absolutely fantastic. They look great. The lighting, the setup, everything, top notch. But when you jump back into some of the in-game cinematics, or just in-game elements in general, when we have some basic camera angles, or where we're just running through the game, period, I just didn't think it looked immensely great. At least for the year that we're in, to the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One cycle, I think they could have done just a little bit better, because again, it felt like it could have easily ran on the PS3. I think you could have taken a better advantage of the system. Now, I mentioned that the game is separated into 4 acts, and it was in Act 1 where I found the game to be a little bit slow. That's because the gameplay from the first game that was often criticized for being Assassin's Creed with Lord of the Rings characters kind of returns, and the tutorial for it is actually rather lengthy. It's not as overbearing as, let's say, Assassin's Creed 3 was, but it's still kept giving me hints and little doodads as to how to do things, some of which I already knew, and some of which I thought I recognized I knew, but then get kind of taken away. I could have sworn I had certain powers at the end of the last game, and then here they're just taken away all of a sudden. I thought that was a little bit of a handicap, and I don't really like it when sequels do that, when they leave you with powers at the end of one game and they just completely take them away for no apparent reason at the beginning of the second game. And come on, guys, don't do that. Us gamers, we really do not like to work back for what we've already earned justifiably. But that gameplay that was criticized is exactly as you would expect, and it gets replicated here, where you're jumping to different environments and structures, taking down orcs, whether it be through stealth, which is not the best stealth necessarily. I mean, Assassin's Creed has its moments that have better stealth than Shadow of War, but that's primarily because that's not where its emphasis is. And its emphasis is on having really cool dynamic gameplay, whether it be the option to go with stealth or to just take these orcs head on with some Batman-esque Arkham type of gameplay, where you're jumping from enemy to enemy, and whenever an enemy is about to hit you from behind, you counter it and you chain all these moves together, while at the same time kind of incorporating an RPG element that allows you to upgrade your weapons, your gear, your armor, stuff like that, as well as attribute various skills over to Talion after gaining enough experience points to gain those points and be able to apply them to Talion and do all this crazy stuff, earn new moves, better your health. The basic mumbo jumbo. And aside from the story, the main reason why I said that this first act was kind of slow was because it just felt kind of rudimentary. It just felt like, okay, you know, it contributed to that whole business decision by WB Games, because it was just me jumping, you know, doing somewhat repetitive tasks here and there where I had to take down a dude and then do that same thing with something else, or there involved certain missions where I had to drain a totem, like a giant pillar like that, and then the game would say, okay, now go do that 3 more times. I'm like, okay, I mean, it's not like I'm not having fun, but you gotta, you know, elevate things more. Well, that's when Act 2 comes in. Act 2 is when we finally get into the nitty-gritty that was advertised from the very beginning, which is not only dominion over orcs and the introduction or reintroduction of the Nemesis system, but it's the one thing that was escalating things. This is the one idea that I thought was generally taken from Monolith Productions, and it was their idea to kind of incorporate this into the Middle-earth sequel, and that was going to be armies. Armies that you're able to generate, to make bigger, to escalate, to level up, to give them weapons and perks and stuff like that, so that you have like the ultimate assault force, and then you could take that assault force and attack fortresses. Those fortresses are basically like little pinpoints on the map that you can take over, and during these scenes, during these missions, it feels like you're reliving one of those war scenes from the Lord of the Rings movies, from the Peter Jackson movies. It feels like that, and it feels epic and awesome, and it just never gets old. And once you conquer those fortresses, it's not going to be easy peasy from there. You have to defend those fortresses, and it's just as fun, where you have to capture certain points where, yeah, that feels like that was taken from other games, but because you're able to use the Shadow War system of gameplay, on top of being able to also turn the tables in very strategic ways, where you can either kill some of these orcs, or you can capture them and turn the tide in your favor, where you can take over the captains, take over the war chiefs. And it feels badass. It's like the epitome of badass. Until... Alright, you know what? I feel like I'm gonna need this, because I'm about to go off. I was under the naive impression that these fortress takeovers were going to be fun. That wasn't until I got to the very second one. The first one, again, going through that tutorial phase, it kind of works your way and kind of holds your hand just a little bit to give you an idea of how these things are going to be. Well, once you get to the second one, I ran into something that was just completely unfathomable, and I just really could not believe. And I'm like, why is this happening? Basically, I was getting my ass handed to me by an orc that was significantly lower in level than I was. We're talking 16 levels lower than me. He was a level 20, I was level 36. And yet, for some reason, I was getting killed. And of course, because of the Nemesis system, for those of you who may not know and never got a chance to play Shadow of Mordor, the Nemesis system is a system in which if you go after an orc, then obviously you guys are going to be locked into a battle. If you kill him, not only do you get XP, but there's also the potential of another orc taking its place. But if you confront that orc and capture him instead of killing him, he'll then work under your army upon the plate, upon the board there, and you can then control that orc to go kill another orc, or to promote it to as a war chief or something like that. However, the catch to this is that if an orc kills you, they'll actually get tougher. They're gonna get stronger. Along with that, there's even little tie-ins and little circumstances and little catches that can happen within the Nemesis system, where if you kill one orc, an orc that was a brother to that orc will then come by and ambush you or take their revenge. Or if you shame an orc, they'll come back and be like, hey, you shamed me, I'm gonna kill you, or something like that. Several revenges and certain vendettas are actually formed out of this thing. So since this guy kept killing me, he kept raising in level. Level 30, level 35, level 40, up until where we were like neck and neck. And I just did not get it. So I thought, okay, let me go ahead and try other fortresses. And some of them I was able to conquer, some of them I wasn't able to, and it was the same deal. They were lower in level than I was, yet they were killing me because they were either overpowered, they had this kind of characteristic where they would get angry and enraged, and they would be like an unstoppable force where there was like no break and there's like physically no way to hit them. I have everything stacked up. I got gems on my weapons. The weapons are leveled up. I'm leveled up. I got skills. It didn't make logical sense, and that's when it dawned on me. Please, for the love of God, do not tell me that this is the paywall. This is where WB stepped in and said, you know what, make that shit harder so that you have to buy from our market. The game has a market section where you can go in and spend some of the in-game currency to buy certain loot crates that will give you either orc war chiefs, like superpowered orcs that you can make into captains, or war chiefs that have characteristics about them that are super strong in that, as well as various other things that you can give talent, like armors, gems, even an XP boost. And of course, with all these little microtransactions, even if they give you the option to spend in-game money, you're always welcome to give in real money. And that's where I felt like something sketchy was happening. But alas, I was able to conquer the fortresses. Why? Because I had to lower the difficulty. I had to do it. I lowered the difficulty, and I was able to progress to that one fucker who kept killing me like multiple times. That was the only way that I could do it. Otherwise, I would have to grind for like hours and hours and hours just so I can beat this one guy. From that point on, we lead further into the game. And without getting into spoilers, let's just say that the game is then going to proceed into some more fortress conquering or some more fortress defense missions, where the same principle is being added. Where you can either grind out the game for like hundreds more, well, not 100 hours, but dozens and dozens more hours to get the full Middle-earth Shadow War experience. I'm trying to be as spoiler-free as I possibly can. Or you can give over the money, level your characters up instantly, and beat this thing. Or do the thing that feels very, very unethical and lower the difficulty, because I wanted to do this all the way through at normal, and I had to do it that one time on easy because I could not do it. And in the process that I am right now, which is considered the end game for Shadow War, which is something that I can get into, but the video's already running long, and also I feel like this could be a whole separate video in of itself, so I'm going to save that for another time. But in the process of what I'm going through right now, I can only imagine just how much further and further the game's going to push these orcs to where it's impossible to really level them up to the way that the enemies are, and I just feel like a paywall is eventually going to hit me in the head. And when I have growing suspicions of that happening, of something malicious happening in the behind the scenes, then I just can't really enjoy myself. I really can't really dive deep into the game and have fun with it while thinking that I'm being played for a fool here. And I do not remember Shadow of Mordor giving me that impression whatsoever. So needless to say, I prefer Shadow of Mordor quite a bit over Shadow War. I'm probably in the minority here because I saw so many sites giving it glowing reviews, and that hyped me up. But needless to say, there were certain aspects about this game, from its opening act that I thought was a little bit slow, to some of these paywall suspicions that are giving me the very firm impression that Shadow War was a little bit fast-tracked by WB. And if it was given its proper time and had Monolith Productions done something else to really get their creative pulses out to develop that brand new IP or whatever that game was going to be, and then dive back into Shadow of War the way that Rockstar kind of does with their properties, I think Shadow War could have been an even better game, because there's some really great ideas happening with Shadow War that still made me had fun and with the game, and also made me feel like a badass, from the fortress takeovers to the way that I was building my army and how addictive it can get to take these orcs and put them up against other orcs to level them up, and then take those orcs, put them as war chiefs, and really build your fortress. And again, even though I prefer the story to Shadow of Mordor a little bit better, that ending, it made me think about it way after I had wrapped-ish, kind of, sort of. Again, can't go into spoilers, but I still haven't really determined if I beat the game or not. So I'm going to be giving Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor a very solid 8 out of 10. It's still a really good game, and if you played the first one and was a humongous fan of that first game, I do think that you should give Shadow War a try. I just feel like you need to be notified of all of those potential problems that you might have, because I love Shadow of Mordor, and I was expecting to love Shadow War, but I think I'm in the minority where I say that I really prefer that first game over this one, because this is what happens when corporations start to see the dollar signs after humongous success, and why so many developing teams need to tread lightly. First, Visceral Games gets shut down by EA, and now this. Here's to hoping that we don't have to worry about much else. But if you have not played the game and would still like to purchase it even after watching my review, then be sure to use the link in the description below. It will really help me out a lot. In the meantime, however, you can always feel free to like and share this video to support it, as well as supporting the channel by hitting the subscribe button down below. Until next time, guys, see you all later. In the meantime, fall under my dominion. That's what WB Games said. And I can't get it out of my iPod either. It's on my iPod. I'm not kidding. My girlfriend caught me listening to it one time. She considered breaking up with me.